Okay, I think we are live now, so I'll kick it off. Hi everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar today and spending your lunchtime with us. My name is Aitor, and I'm going to be your host for today. It's a bit of a long title for today, but we're going to be talking about how can companies elevate their multi-sourcing potential through the power of digitalization. I would like to thank ASCI for the opportunity to be here today. The talk will take around 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes, depending on how fast they go. And it will be followed by a Q&A at the end. So if you can send your questions towards the end, that would be great. And yeah, I hope you find the topic interesting. I'm very excited to be here today. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to start talking by the dynamic shift happening in the sourcing landscape. Specifically, we'll talk around China Plus One policy and strategy, and really how this is driving businesses to diversify their sourcing strategies. We're going to touch upon the implications of this strategy and how organizations globally are adapting to this new sourcing trend. Afterwards, we'll talk about the knock-on effect against the supply chain vulnerabilities and risks associated with this changing landscape and some of the considerations for companies to have when moving their sourcing into multiple locations globally. Then we'll touch on some of the industry experts or industry observers and get some statistics, some trends, some challenges. We're going to cover some of the key numbers that have been floating around papers and publications over the last for the last 12 months on this topic. And then we'll jump into technology and we'll discuss the role of tech and how is it being used today and how it's expected to be used in the future to deal with this change in the sourcing landscape. From a Q&A perspective, if you can send your questions to the Q&A box, I'll answer as many as I can. Otherwise, I'll reply offline after the session, if that's okay. Just very quickly about myself, so you know who's talking to you today. So my name is Aitor Marroquin. That picture there, I think 3 years ago when I first landed in Australia. I think I'm still allowed to use it. I look fairly similar, but yeah, I think I need to update it at some point. But my role is I'm the Vice President of Commercial of Technology for EV Cargo. EV Cargo is a global logistics and supply chains solutions company. And I am Sydney-based. I've been here for 3 years now. I love it here. And my experience is threefold, mostly looking after supply chain technology, both from a sourcing, compliance, and execution perspective, supply chain management, helping companies worldwide with their supply chains, and shipping. So having worked for a global shipping line at the start of my career. My background is international, as you can probably tell. I'm not from around here. I'm from Spain originally. Before Australia, I was in the UK for around 8 years, also in France, and the US and Spain before. So been working across multiple countries. And my experience is mostly, not only, but mostly retail. So I've been working with global retailers, helping them optimize their supply chain through technology and different solutions throughout my career. So that's just a very quick overview of myself. And yeah, I'm very excited to be talking here again today. I did a couple of webinars the last few years, so today's topic is very interesting. Okay, so if we jump into today's topic, we'll talk about the dynamic shift in sourcing. So first, many of you will be aware of what China Plus One policy or strategy is, but for those of you who aren't, it really began gaining attention and being implemented by businesses around 10 years ago. It's really a strategic approach by organizations to diversify their sourcing beyond China. So China was obviously and still is the factory of the world, really, as people call it. But with rising labor costs, geopolitical risks, and supply chain disruptions experienced worldwide, we've seen many companies actively looking for alternatives away from China and sourcing from other locations so they don't rely so heavily on China. So this means either reducing their footprint in China entirely or just a share to diversify risk. So we will talk about some statistics later on, and we can see this trend obviously being very strong these days as well. So one example, which we will talk about many later on, is Apple. Obviously, everyone knows the company, and Apple has been diversifying its supply chain beyond China by expanding production and assembly operations in countries such as India and Vietnam. They're also considering nearshoring, which we will touch on later on as well. And again, this just represents one example, as one large, well-known company removing some of their dependence on China in the recent years. So what are the main benefits or reasons as to why people are diversifying their supply chain away from China? So first of all is cost savings. So the raising labor cost in China is one of the main factors that triggered all of this. China, obviously, it was known for cost-effective labor and production, but as many of you know, they've evolved very quickly over the last decades, and labor costs have considerably gone up as a result, which means that other countries have started to catch up, not in the same terms, but we can see some other attractive options from a labor perspective in other parts of the world. So as a result, companies are looking for exploring more competitive labor somewhere else, more favorable exchange rates, and also tax incentives in different regions. The second element is technology and its expertise. And again, certain regions and countries have different skill sets. This is not so much some are better than others. However, companies are looking to expand manufacturing to those countries that may have a specific technological edge for specific products and commodities, really with the aim of trying to gain a competitive advantage. This links as well with specialized labor markets, which again, depending on the product or the commodity you're working with, will play a role in it. Thirdly is proximity to clients. So setting up production facilities closer to target markets, being able to reduce transportation costs, lead times, and really allowing companies to be more responsive to customer demands. This is quite relevant in this day and age, and we're seeing that happening from a nearshoring perspective as well. Risk mitigation is another main area being considered at the moment. Supply chain disruptions can be caused by a number of factors. So whether it's political tensions to global pandemics, if companies are predominantly sourcing from one single country, all it takes is one of these big disruptions to take place, and then all the eggs will almost be in one basket, having a bit of a problem from a supply chain perspective. So that's something that's being considered by countries to being able to diversify away from just having all options into one market. The other option to consider is better compliance management. So keeping up with legislation is obviously very, very important. I'm just going to give an example. Recently in China, I'm probably not going to pronounce it properly, but the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in the Xinjiang region of China came into effect in 2022, passed by the US Congress. This was to combat forced labor policies in certain parts of China, which means that a lot of companies moved away from that region due to this Prevention Act that was put in place. So this is obviously just one example of the legislation that companies need to keep up with in order to remain compliant globally. But this is something that we're seeing companies doing from a diversification perspective. And then the last point is market access. So this is similar to proximity to clients, but this is more linked to opening up new markets. So whether it's choosing a +1 country with destinations that allow companies to tap into different markets and being able to use the location of those clients in a more strategic way to be able to understand consumer behavior, trends, and demands in certain parts of the world. That's what really is driving some of these companies to look at different regions where not so much the existing market that they got at the moment, but new locations where they want to tap into new trends and being able to set up manufacturing and supplier bases closer to those locations. Okay, so these are some of the main areas that we've discussed in terms of why companies are diversifying away from China and the trends. In terms of the numbers, so is this really working? What kind of impact is this strategy having? So in this graph, we're looking at the interdependence between China and the US. We will look at Australia later on as well, but the US being the largest economy in the world, largest GDP country in the world, it makes sense to compare that. So here we're looking at the interdependence from three different angles. So exports from China to the US imports into China, and then the overall interdependence between both regions. And we can clearly see the graph. The interdependence is going down, and this is mainly going and declining on the back of trade tensions, tariff disputes, and also the reasons that we discussed before. So there's three, I guess, points or trends to cover here. One is the supply chain diversification, which we just discussed from a China plus one perspective. This is making companies actively looking for different ways to diversify the supply chain away from China. So on the back of trade tensions and disputes, obviously diversification, as we just discussed, is creating this trend downwards. Just adding some data here, around 51% of companies surveyed by the US-China Business Council stated that they were considering or had already moved some of the manufacturing or sourcing away from China. The second element here is the increased imports into other countries. So again, that's a knock-on effect. So as they move away from China, we've seen other alternative sourcing regions picking up. And again, some data here. So the US Census Bureau indicated a notable increase in imports into the US from countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and Taiwan. So they were some of the winners, I guess, in that trade-off over the last few years. And then the last point is reshoring, which we briefly touched on before. We've witnessed a change in this direction. Many reasons. One of them is political, as we can see. US elections happening this year. But we can see this trend, reflecting overall a desire to reduce reliance on, foreign supply chains. Examples again include companies like Apple that they're announcing some manufacturing to happen in the US, and we can see this happening with, microchip influence from countries like Taiwan and countries like the US trying to expand their reliance away from specific countries as well. So this is almost a deglobalization move that we're seeing across the world at the moment, with moving away from some of these developing country opportunities into their own soil. In this graph, we'll quickly look at the apparel sector specifically, and then we'll look at Australia as well. And here we can see how China overall market share between different regions into the US is decreased significantly. Some of the winning countries, I guess, in this case, as we can see, are Vietnam, Bangladesh, who picked up most of the China's lost market share in the US apparel imports. And that's just some information. So yeah, Asian countries excluding China accounted for 51% of US apparel imports, which is a substantial increase from 41% from where we were before. So another factor we considered as well before is compliance and ethical standards. So we talked about the cotton industry in Xinjiang, in North China, that was accused of forced labor. So we saw a swift change in this region, with basically all of their exports disappearing overnight almost. So that was a massive change from that point of view. If we look at Australia, quickly from a merchandising imports perspective, here we can see how the graphs, in this case, we're looking at imports by customs value by different countries, China, the US, Japan, and so on. And we can see the lines of other Asian countries, catching up with China. So China is still going up in real terms, but if we were to look at the market share of some of these values, then we can see how in comparable terms, China's market share of imports is obviously going down compared to other parts of the world. So it's fair to say Australia is a bit behind. There's some of the aggressiveness that we've seen in the US and even the EU, but we are starting to see that trend, not only from data, but also from our own sources, talking to many retailers. One main Australian department store has quoted to us that they decreased their overseas spending from China from 85% of their spend to 60% in 2023, which is again in line with what we're seeing globally in terms of trends. Okay, so if we talk about next up is just looking at data from a different point of view. So this is more from a demand perspective. So in the left-hand side, we can see the exports developing from Asia. This is across, China, which is the orange line, developing Asian countries apart from China, which is the black line, and then we can see the gray line, which is the key technological exporter. So overall, we can see a steep decline, which means that the global demand is down, as we know from different reports, and how we are obviously feeling the inflationary pressures as well in Australia over the last year or so. So this is to reflect that obviously countries are moving away from China, but overall, demand is also pretty weak over the last year. So just to supplement with some similar information, we can see the world, some of the information from the World Trade Organization in terms of volume. So obviously the graph, you can see COVID there. So we're looking here merchandise and trade volumes, and then the GDP growth for against market exchange rates. So COVID caused that negative decline, and then we can see volumes picking up right after. For 2023, there was an estimate of around 1.7% growth for merchandise and trade, and we're expecting a 2.5 growth from a market exchange perspective, from a GDP perspective for 2023. This is below average compared to the last 10 years. However, for 2024, we can see the outlook improving slightly, becoming a bit more in line with the average going forward. So again, we can see the reflection of the confidence on volume and trade, how it's not as strong as it used to be. So obviously plays an impact on global trade. Okay, and then the next slide, we're going to be talking about some global trends that we're seeing overall at a sector level in 2023. So in this graph, we can see the black lines looking at annual growth by different sectors, and then the orange lines looking at quarterly growth. So we can see who some of the winners were back then. Obviously, energy is the biggest element that we can see here. The black line over there. This is fueled by some of the issues and some of the conflicts in Europe and how the commodity prices increased during that point. And then we can see some of the other elements that benefited from increased trade. So we can see agricultural food products, apparel, and chemicals and road vehicles are experiencing trade growth globally. And then if we look at different sectors, so this is global apparel, which we've been talking about before. We can see how as a market is around $1.7 trillion revenue in terms of global share, which growing around 2.8%. The largest segment was women's apparel, just for information, generating around $0.9 trillion of revenue, and we know the US was leading the revenue share in that part of that sector globally, around 300 billion. And yeah, the market volume, again, just for reference, is around 196 billion pieces expected to be produced by 2028. So we can see a significant amount of growth from an apparel perspective. This slide is just to really showcase some of the sectors that are growing and some of the ones that are not growing. As we discussed, energy is the highest growth, trade driven by high prices. However, we did see a decrease from Q4 2022 onwards, so we can see that declining going forward. And then lastly, so we can look at some of the sectors that didn't progress from a trade perspective. So office and communication equipment, transportation sector are the key ones that went down compared to previous years. Okay, so we looked at some of the reasons as to why China Plus One is happening and why companies are diversifying away from one origin. So in this slide, we're going to look at some of the consequences and some of the implications to be had globally. So the first one is the number of increased costs. Even though we talked about labor costs being more competitive in other parts of the world, really when we are setting up an operation in a different region, we need to look at the higher cost of establishing manufacturing facilities or sourcing from multiple countries. So, for example, if a retailer is setting up an operation in a different country, things like higher labor, wages, transportation expenses, compliance with local regulations, that's obviously all going to take an impact, either as a one-off cost, but also going forward in terms of recurring cost of operating from a new location. The other area is supply chain complexity. So as we increase the number of touch points, obviously we're going to be increasing the complexity across different regions. So if we're moving away from either one or two or three sourcing locations into multiple, we're going to have things like lead times consideration, providers, regulations. It's all going to have an impact in terms of increasing complexity, and this is where we can see things like technology, which we will discuss later on, playing a role and supporting this specific challenge. The other area is a scale reduction. So this is twofold. Firstly, from a buying power of purchasing product perspective, but also from a container utilization perspective. So if we are sourcing from multiple new regions and we are not increasing the number of our order quantities, obviously our buying power is going to be decreasing across multiple suppliers, which means that we're going to be potentially paying more per unit going forward, and we're not going to have the same purchasing power with some of those suppliers. The same applies for things like container utilization. So if we were already optimizing everything 65 CBM for a 40 high cube container from Shanghai, if we're moving some of our production away to different countries, then we're going to see some of that economies of scales moving away. The fourth element is quality control challenges. This is just a consideration to be had in some part of the world where so there could be challenges in maintaining a consistent quality control standards. So making sure that suppliers are adhering to the same levels of quality as the operation currently had in China could be quite a challenge in some cases. We're actually seeing some global suppliers that are global companies that are talking to suppliers in China, for instance, and they're asking them to almost convincing them to move away to different regions to prepare to support them with their sourcing processes. So not so much as gathering and setting up operations with different local suppliers, but also bringing Chinese suppliers away from them to mitigate some of these risks. And then the last part is potential disruptions and risks. So we can see retailers expanding their operations to new countries and exposing themselves to various risks and potential disruptions. So things like political instability in terms of sourcing destinations, trade barriers, tariffs, whether they're import or export restrictions, changes in regulations. So as we move to new locations, we're going to be exposed to new requirements specific to each country. So companies will be exposed to different parts of disruption globally. I think overall what we're seeing is that companies are moving away from a cost-effective supply chain. This is what the industry is talking about today, in the benefit of a more flexible and resilient supply chain that can deal with different business priorities and objectives. So remaining agile and resilient is really a priority that we're seeing at the moment. Okay, so moving into the next section of the presentation. So if we look at what experts are saying about the industry, so the market has really identified dual sourcing as a key initiative to increase supply chain resilience, and at the same time, there's a clear opportunity to digitize the sourcing process. So this is not just us, saying it. There's industry experts and observers looking at this data globally. So the first one is Accenture, where they're really highlighting the innovation and future readiness as an imperative. So we can see shockingly that only 2% of sourcing directors seeing their operations as future ready. with 90% of those sourcing directors feeling the pressure to enhance innovation. A different section that we can see here is PwC. There's different findings throughout the reports, and they report around 60% of companies being interested in implementing ESG and CSR digital solutions, with around 69% of those companies naming cost reduction as one of the top 3 strategic priorities for the year. And then the last report to cover here is from McKinsey & Company, where we can see they're really highlighting the resilience imperative in supply chain. So 93% of respondents, they were planning to increase their supply chain resilience, and dual sourcing, really utilizing that as a mechanism to enhance that resilience. So I think in summary, we can see that there is definitely a need for companies to focus on future readiness, to innovate, to integrate ESG and CSR considerations with cost management, and really emphasizing supply chain resilience and dual sourcing as the next focus area for those companies. Okay, so if we talk specifically around technology and digital sourcing, so as we discussed, we talked about the significant factor affecting industry. So why is there talk from a digital perspective and sourcing perspective? So I think the first thing to consider is that we are seeing the result of China Plus One as switching strategies away from companies' specific current strategies at the moment. So this is influencing how clients go about managing their supply chains. One of the key areas that we discuss with our clients every day is how do we go about optimizing supply chain network planning. So we've seen a revolution really, and almost a next shift when it comes to planning supply chains globally. So moving away from a more traditional model into a dynamic modern system application. So this is with the use of things like real-time optimization and decision making using AI and analytics. This leads into things such as improving forecasting, reducing lead times, and increasing efficiencies really. So it's really the ability to adapt and to stay competitive. We're seeing this in the market these days, where supply chains, especially after COVID, they're not really longer seen as as a cost center. They're more seen as an enabler of competitive advantage for growth from a supply chain perspective. And we can see the use of the latest technology really impacting things here. So this is predominantly AI and Gen AI and machine learning. So this is obviously a very big trend right now across the industry, and revolutionizing supply chain and sourcing as we know it. So AI enhances decision making. So things like analytical power to transform decision making. That's where we're seeing the biggest impact from an AI perspective. So AI is designed, as we know, to replicate human intelligence and being able to draw conclusions and being able to make decisions really. But generative AI, that's where we're seeing the biggest change really, because it really stands out as for its unique ability to learn from vast amounts of data and generate new information, contents and insights that we can see, photographs, videos, text, expanding that level of knowledge that we had before. So using generative AI, this really opens the door to new opportunities and to improve areas just such as demand forecasting, risk management, and so on. I was listening to a podcast the other day from Gartner Supply Chain, and they were saying that by 2028, all supply chain KPIs will be done by Gen AI. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's something I see quite possible, and that's where we can see the use of Gen AI happening in the future. So I think the main thing to call out from an emerging technology perspective, that this is not really just an upgrade, as we see from our point of view, it's really a shift towards creating, intelligent and adaptive, proactive supply chains that we're seeing in the market. So this will increase things such as, visibility, reduce risks, supply chains, and so on. I think the other area to consider here is ethical trade, and this is ethical considerations that are actually dictated by clients. So obviously there is current generations and new generations, behind us with, very different priorities, and things such as, traceability, environmental footprint, labor standards, they are all very important to the clients, and they will almost determine the success of a specific brand or product based on that, their interpretation of how ethical companies are about bringing that product to market. So being able to integrate ethical trade practices into sourcing strategies is something that we've seen as a trend, and where technology is placing, making an important step forward. We can see the focus on, fair labor, responsible sourcing, and transparent supply chains benefiting from this change in view. The fifth point to cover here is ESG integration. So this is now a must from a supply chain decision-making perspective, companies to be able to use technology to play a key role in enabling ESG goals. So whether it's reducing carbon footprint to ensuring, fair labor practices, digital tools are, here to provide that data needed to ensure and improve ESG performance. And we can see that. We can see companies are embracing, ESG with digitalization in order for them to get, positive impact on sustainability and profitability. And then the last point to consider here as to why, sourcing and digital tools are being talked about at the moment is really inflation driving efficiency and cost control. So cost control, as we know, is a key trend in 2024 across all industries. We saw the weak demand in the previous slides and how that's affecting the market. So the economic landscape is really marked by inflationary pressures and reduced demand that we've seen at the moment. So digital tools are being used for, cost saving, inventory optimization, and streamlining processes, and really utilizing technology to, to mitigate that inflation impact on supply chain costs. So again, technology here is an enabler that we've seen happening. So yeah, overall, we've seen multi-sourcing becoming a value generator rather than a cost center. And again, it's not just an upgrade; it's a path to create intelligent and adaptive, forward-thinking supply chains to create success in the global market. So before we talked about digitalization of key sourcing processes. So from our point of view, I guess we want to talk about which processes are we talking about from a digital sourcing perspective. So from our point of view, we envision everything to be covered by one single integrated solution. We actually have a product called EasySource, which I'll talk about shortly. But the first step really in the sourcing process is ethical trade and supplier setup. This is evaluating our commitment to responsible sourcing and being able to track and ensure adherence to ethical standards with factories and suppliers from the very beginning. So being able to promote transparency and accountability in the supply chain is critical at this very first part of the sourcing process. The second part is seasonal range planning, or just range planning in general. And this is the section where global companies and specifically retailers, they need agility in order to respond quickly to market trends and to planning and for the planning of new products. So we see the use of real-time data analytics for informed decision making being the key on this part of the sourcing process, and how optimizing seasonal product offerings for maximum impact and customer satisfaction is the main use that technology providers are facilitating at this point of the supply chain. Thirdly, we're talking about the in this section, tendering for new products. So going out to suppliers to find the right product, digitalizing the platform to streamline and enhance procurement processes through digital platforms. So this is really accelerating the time to market to foster collaboration with suppliers, and in essence promoting a more agile and responsive sourcing ecosystem that can facilitate dual sourcing. So being able to compare quotes, like to live back-to-back, landed cost, all the details needed to be more agile in this part of the supply chain going forward. The fourth area to consider is finalizing and maintaining the product master. So this is where we can see again a revolution, and digital tools playing a key part from a product lifecycle management perspective. So centralizing all the data, across different databases and ensuring there's accuracy. We can reduce by reducing errors as well, and expediting product launches with quality. So trying to remove data silos from companies' structure as much as possible, and expand beyond sourcing in this section. Next point will be sampling and production within the sourcing process, and again enhancing collaboration with manufacturers through the use of digital tools. This is where we see that process becoming enhanced, and optimizing the sampling process to expedite product development. And then the last part to consider is connecting everything from a sourcing perspective down to an execution level. So most of these processes happen before a purchase order is even being raised, but really the value here, as we mentioned, is moving away from data silos within the global organizations, and that's where the real value lies as well. So integrating all this product information down the supply chain to ensure seamless visibility from source to consumer. So on the next slide, I would like to talk about the principle of digitalization from our point of view, and this is the 3 I's. So for us, the 3 I's are, by the way, information, insight, and intelligence. So if we start with information, this is what we know, the different data points available throughout the supply chain, and any organization will have access to them. So this is how are we using this data to learn from it. So these information points could be anything, could be supplier information, factories, costs, lead times, product master data, you name it. So I think the important thing to call out here is that accurate analysis is going to depend on the quality of the information being fed through from this point of view. And this is what we're finding, and industry experts are finding as well, is that many companies are actually struggling with the data, and even trusting their data. So building intelligent solutions on top of data that cannot be trusted is obviously something that we've gone seeing badly in the past. The next section is insights. So what can be improved, right? So this is where analytics comes into play, and artificial intelligence. So using that data to give us those insights. So those insights could be things like which suppliers and which factories are performing well, which ones are performing badly. What is there room for supply chain, packaging, lead time optimization or improvements? Where can we save cost? So really summarizing all this vast amount of data in front of us. And the next section is intelligence, which is, as we call it, connecting the dots. So being able to proactively push information to us and showing us the next stage, which is how do we go about it, right? So you've shown us the information before of the areas that need improvement, but this is about how do we choose which suppliers and why, how much should we order, which suppliers do we buy from, and which strategies do we need to drive overall performance from. So it's really bridging that gap between what we know and how we use the technology, and this is where we can see generative AI playing a key role going forward. Okay, so how can EVSource help? So this is again, from an EV cargo perspective, we develop supply chain solutions, and this is the section where I just give you a quick summary of some of the benefits of how our technology helps support this decision making. So first one is empowering multi-sourcing. So our technology enables multi-sourcing, being able to allow global vendors and factories engagement to mitigate risk and enhance supply chain resilience. So one example from our side would be brief and quote as an example, where we are able to follow traceability and review online quotes, dual multi-sourcing support, and being able to support global buying features. So This is all achieved by a unified platform with configurable options to tailor solutions as specific business process needs. The second area to consider here is effortless digitalization. So again, moving away from data in silos and being able to enhance supply chain collaboration and improve supply chain data visibility by digitizing data and workflows. An example from our side would be EVSource Product Master Hub, which is the application that we use to centralize data across the entire supply chain, transforming the data, offering a centralized platform for creating and standardizing product records. This is, again, moving away from data silos and making it centrally available across global different time zones. So yeah, in this case, we're able to provide supply chain visibility and a configurable view end to end. And then is the use of emerging technology, as I mentioned before. So using AI and analytics, so streamlining data-driven decision making with the integration of AI and advanced analytics, providing that competitive edge in a rapidly growing landscape. Some of the tools that we've developed on this space with the help of AI and analytics are predictive stock, delivery forecast, supply chain analytics, strategic forecasting, and so on. There's a number of tools that we are using to evaluate thousands of data points to learn patterns and incorporate industry trends to offer intelligent suggestions. And then the last area to consider here is the enablement of ethical sourcing. So being able to facilitate ethical sourcing practices by really integrating environmental impact assessments, carbon footprints, and resource consumption metrics. So this is all built into our product ecosystem and EVSource. We can do this through different modules such as ethical trade and packaging compliance that we use with many clients globally. Okay, so from a summary perspective, we looked at the global sourcing trends. So we discussed China plus one and how companies are diversifying. How companies are diversifying their supply chain away from China, and really the impact that this is being had on companies globally from a supply chain perspective. We looked at supply chain vulnerabilities and some of the considerations to be had on this case as well, and then being able to deal with some of the consequences from a supply chain perspective. And then we've gone through some expert opinions on sourcing from some industry experts and some industry leaders to understand the impact and the readiness of supply chains globally from a innovation perspective. And then lastly, we looked at the importance of digitalization. So really how digitalization plays a pivotal, a very important role driving competitive advantage, and how our module, for instance, EVSource, support transparent platforms for multi-sourcing digitalization process perspective. So again, this is where technology is a key driver that we've seen happening and supporting companies across the world, and we can see how it all connects together from the trend that we've seen with industries moving away and diversifying and making the supply chains more complicated. Some of the considerations and knock-on effects that need to be considered and addressed through the use of technology, and then again being in line with what the industry observers are looking into, what the industry feels like needs to happen from a supply chain readiness perspective going forward. And that's all from my side. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to have a look to see if there is any questions. One second. Okay, so we got one quick question, which is, how do you see the impact of multi-sourcing and technology supporting the existing global disruption challenges such as the Red Sea crisis So this is a good question. So I guess connecting the dots between the reality and practicability of the technology. So obviously the supply chain, the Red Sea crisis is uncertain as to when it's going to finish. It couldn't really be predicted. We can see lead times expanding around 14 days at the moment, and really affecting vessel redeployments globally. So driving prices up. So I guess from an Australia perspective, even though there is, the lead time effect is not felt, global pricing is definitely picking up and having an impact on it. So obviously this couldn't be predicted before. I mean, there could be some predictions from reports into some of this tension happening in this part of the world, but I think the learning here is that again, supply chains need to be agile, need to be resilient, and they need to be ready to adapt. So a global company that would have taken steps beforehand by moving some of their production away from China into Turkey, for instance, will have obviously not experienced as much disruption from a lead time perspective. So I think what technology supports here is twofold. From being fast to react and support decision making. So being able to say, okay, this is the situation in China at the moment. How can we ensure we have what other sourcing options do we have at the moment, and which suppliers are available to us? This is where modules like EVSource can jump in and support. And also from an execution perspective, to understand what alternative options are there to move my cargo into Europe or into Australia, where there's been an impact to lead times. So whether it's a sea air operation, whether it's changing the order levels into different suppliers readily available in different parts of the world. Again, it's a good example where technology is needed to be able to withstand that kind of level of disruption. Okay. One more question. So how will AI and Gen AI help drive efficiency in sourcing and supply chain? So what are the prerequisites? So again, AI and Gen AI is a really, really hot topic. Everyone is talking about it. It is happening, whether we want it or not. Is imperative really at this point, not just from our industry, but for every industry really. As we know, the AI purpose is to replicate human intelligence, where again Gen AI is definitely more advanced, and we can see much larger sets of data being absorbed and being used to generate new information. I think I recall a report from KPMG quoting around 50% of supply chain organizations wanting to invest in Gen AI and AI applications into 2024. As mentioned, KPI reporting is going to be something which I'm sure Gen AI will do most of the work for us in the future. However, the main issue to call out, as I mentioned before, is really the data, really the underlying source of data which we are using to generate these insights. Because many companies are quoting that even though they may have tools that gives them suggestions as to what to do with their supply chain, many processes are still done offline without not knowing exactly how that insight or that recommendation has been put together. There's still a reluctancy to trust data, to trust technology. So it's very important to make sure that we have a trustable set of data, removing silos across the organization, but also being able to have enough insight from a human perspective as to how decisions are being made by the technology tools that we are deploying, in order for us to have a level of trust to say, okay, I know how the system came to this recommendation. I agree with it, rather than following blind recommendations or instructions that are not so much happening. So it's very interesting to see what will happen to that relationship between obviously us humans and technology, and it's going to have to be a blend of ultimate decision being made by the human and by the operators, but again utilizing all that knowledge and vast amount of information of data available to help us making the best possible decision going forward. Okay. I think that was all the questions that I got. So yeah, thank you all for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. I think I went a little bit too fast, but if you have any questions, please do let me know. You can reach out to me through my email address or through my phone or through LinkedIn. And yeah, if you got anything else you would like to discuss with me, please do reach out. All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Aita. Thank you so much for your amazing presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. I hope you find the shared information useful and insightful. Remember to apply the knowledge gained in your work and share it with others. The webinar recording will be shared with you and uploaded to our ASCI YouTube channel in a few days. And don't forget to check out our website for more resources and upcoming events. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.